The Rule 5 draft will take place on Wednesday in Nashville, Tennessee at 1 p.m. local time, 2 p.m. Eastern time, and I'm not going to be there. And for me, that's been kind of a bummer. It is the low-key, under-the-radar conclusion to the winter meetings every year, and I'm a big fan, and I was super excited to go last year in 2022 in San Diego, but I will not be there in 2023 in Nashville, despite the fact it's very close, drivable distance from me in Atlanta, but could not secure the credential this year. I'm not here to be sad about that. I'm here to give them a reason to give me the credential next year in 2024 and beyond, because I am a Rule 5 draft fan. But what is the Rule 5 draft, you may ask? Well, it's a way to prevent teams from hoarding too many MLB-ready prospects. It's a way for generally bad teams with holes in their roster to acquire potentially good, cheap, young talent. So who is eligible to be selected in the Rule 5 draft this year? Well, it's any prospect who turned pro 4 or 5 seasons ago, and that depends on their age when they turn pro. For example, if you were drafted out of college in the 2020 first-year player draft, meaning you were age 19 or older at the time you turned pro, you are now eligible because you have been around for 4 seasons, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. 4 seasons if you turn pro age 19 or older. And for players who turn pro age 18 or younger, so say you were part of the international signing class in 2019 or you were drafted out of high school in 2019, you are also now eligible to be selected in this Rule 5 draft. So this is not a draft of high school kids or college kids. This is a draft of professionals. These are guys who have been playing in the minor leagues for years now, but haven't quite gotten a chance to break the big leagues. But of course, teams don't want to lose their prospects just because they haven't made the big leagues yet. So the question is, how do they protect them? How do they protect their players from being selected in this Rule 5 draft? They add them to the 40-man roster. And you're probably already aware there's a 26-man roster. That is the active roster. That's whoever is playing in Major League Baseball at any given moment. But there's also a 40-man roster, so 14 extra slots that can go to guys who are injured, so not yet on the active roster, but they're injured major leaguers, and also some minor leaguers, potentially ready to be called up in the event of injury. So the reason I like the Rule 5 draft is because I view it as pro player. If you're good, if you're ready, you will either be added to your team's 40-man roster, meaning you will make more money, or you will be selected in the Rule 5 draft and be given a shot to make a team's 26-man roster and play in the big leagues every day and make a lot more money. Because the rule of the Rule 5 draft is that whatever team snatches a guy from a rival organization, that guy has to not just remain on their 40-man roster all of the next year, so all of the 2024 season, they have to remain on the 26-man roster, the active roster. They have to be a major leaguer for the whole season. And if they aren't, if they're, DFA'd, for example, they will be returned to their previous organization. So here are the results for last year's draft. So the 2022 Rule 5 draft, which was held in San Diego, was lucky enough to attend in person. Would like to attend more in person in the future. Credentials person, if you're watching this. Thad Ward, Ryan Noda, Jose Hernandez, Blake Sable, Mason Angler, Kevin Kelly, Nick Enright. All these guys drafted towards the top of the draft stuck. They stuck around in the big leagues all year, so they are now under, the full control of their new organizations. That means they can send them down to AAA if they want to next year. And some of them did really well. Ryan Noda did really, really well for the A's. He looks like he could be their, first baseman for the long-ish term future, at least until they trade him. And then, Kevin Kelly here, he was actually drafted by the Rockies, but later traded to the Rays. And that roster stipulation traveled with him. So just because he got traded, doesn't mean that the Rays didn't have to still keep him on their active 26-man roster all year. They did, and he generally pitched well. Not all of these guys played well, by the way, but they all stuck around. They all, occupied that roster spot, and they are now under full control of their new organizations. And if you look later in the draft, you can see a few things. The first thing that might come to mind is, oh, like the good teams are down here. And yes, this is done in reverse order of wins. So the Dodgers picked last year. That's 30th because they won the most games in 2022. And you see a lot of teams, first of all, passing. And they're passing because, given whoever is still available, they don't see anyone who they would reasonably offer a active 26-man roster spot to for the entire season, which makes sense. I mean, these guys haven't made the big leagues before. And then, you see the guys who did get picked, actually none of them stuck. So those guys in those first, 8 or 9 picks, they all stuck. And then beyond that, none of these guys stuck. They were all returned to their original organizations one way or another. A good example of this is Gus Varland, who was drafted by the Brewers. They said, hey, we'll snatch a pitcher from the Dodgers, see if he's big league ready. And he wasn't. So Gus Varland did indeed start opening day with the Milwaukee Brewers last year as he was selected in the Rule 5 draft by them, and in total he only pitched in 8 games for them at the major league level. He did have some rehab assignments in minor league baseball, so you are allowed to send players down to the minors if they're injured for a limited amount of time to do a rehab assignment. But in the majors, he pitched 8 games for them. He had an ERA over 11, and so the Brewers said, look, we can't give a roster spot to this guy all year. We've had enough. On May 16th, they DFA'd him, and he was returned to the Dodgers, and actually, funnily enough, he actually got called back up by the Dodgers later on in the year in the big leagues, where he did indeed pitch better, at least in the sense that he had a way lower ERA. So that's the story of Gus Varland. It's going to be the story for many of these Rule 5 draft guys. They will be picked by a team, but they may not stick around on that active 26-man roster for the full year, and thus will be returned to their original organizations. Just a little bit of Rule 5 draft history for those interested. Otherwise, feel free to use the chapters down below to skip ahead to my preview of this year's 2023 Rule 5 draft to be held in Nashville on Wednesday. Roberto Clemente was selected in the Rule 5 draft. It was a different set of rules then as it is now, but he was indeed selected, as you can see, from the Brooklyn Dodgers, no less, in the 1954 Rule 5 draft. Johan Santana as well, also selected in the Rule 5 draft. Sorry, got to get down to the bottom of this. December 13th, 1999, drafted by the Florida Marlins from the Houston Astros in the 1999 Rule 5 draft. That day, he was traded to the Minnesota Twins, so that roster stipulation followed him, so he had to stay on the Twins' active roster all year. He did. He threw 86 innings in 2000. They weren't good. He had an ERA of 6.49, but you know what? They got a good young pitcher out of it, and a couple years later, he was a great pitcher, and a couple years after that, he won a Cy Young, and a couple years after that, he won another one. So, Johan Santana. However, that was the 1999 Rule 5 draft, and as far as draft eligibility goes, this current iteration of the Rule 5 draft, those rules really only go back to 2006. So we'll focus on some post-2006 guys and be like, hey, maybe this is why you should care about the Rule 5 draft this year, because you never know. Josh Hamilton, right? Josh Hamilton, he was a first overall pick of the 1999 draft, was out of baseball for quite a few years, and then he came back to the Tampa Bay Rays in 2006, played 15 games for them in the minors, didn't exactly tear it up. As a result, they did not add him to their 40-man, and he became Rule 5 draft eligible. And so what ended up happening in the Rule 5 draft that year in 2006 is that he was drafted actually by the Cubs from the Rays and then purchased by the Reds same day. So he joined the Reds. He had to stay on the Reds roster all year. He played in 90 games for them. He was great. He was traded to the Texas Rangers, and the rest is history. He won MVP. So that's Josh Hamilton, and that's how he became eligible. Ryan Presley was selected in the 2012 iteration of the draft. As you can see, he was drafted out of high school in 2007, so 5 years later, he became eligible for the Rule 5 draft, was not added to the Boston Red Sox 40-man roster, and as a result, drafted by the Twins in the 2012 Rule 5 draft, and as you know, he was also later traded by the Twins to the Astros. This was 6 years later, though. He already had put together some pretty good seasons with the Twins, but really took over with the Astros, became one of the best closers in baseball for the last, half decade or so. Now, the Astros themselves drafted Josh Fields from the Red Sox in 2012, which really isn't that interesting until you remember, oh yeah, hold on a second. They drafted him from the Houston Astros in the 2012 Rule 5 draft, and then a few years later, they traded him for a guy named Yordan Alvarez. In 2014, the Phillies selected Odubel Herrera from the Texas Rangers. He had a few really good seasons for them, and then things turned not good in a hurry, but he was indeed an all-star for them at one point, and they got him for basically free. It only costs $100,000 to Rule 5 draft someone in the Major League round. That same year, 2014, Mark Canha was also Rule 5'd. He was originally in the Rockies organization, and he joined the Marlins, but then traded that day to the Oakland Athletics. So guys, Rockies, maybe you should have protected Mark Canha back then. Seems like he's had a pretty nice Major League Baseball career so far without you. In 2016, so ahead of the 2017 season, the Baltimore Orioles grabbed Anthony Santander from Cleveland, and he's become sort of a fixture in their lineup since. He survived the entire rebuild, so great pick there by the Orioles back in 2016, grabbing Anthony Santander for basically free. The year after that, so 2017, this is a fun one, the Orioles grabbed Nestor Cortez from the Yankees, and he stunk. They pitched him in, 4 games, granted, to be fair, but they were like, hey, his ERA's bad. His FIP is worse. We got to get rid of him. We'll DFA him, send him back to the Yankees April 13th, 2018. Rest is history. Even though the Yankees did indeed trade him to the Mariners, he was granted free agency, signs back with the Yankees. And since that 2021-ish, he's been in their rotation. He's been a fixture. And in 2022, he had an excellent year. In 2020, the Yankees did indeed get plundered a bit for some of their pitching depth they were probably hoping to hold on to, even though they couldn't find space for them on the 40-man. Trevor Stephan, he was selected from them by Cleveland. He's been in their bullpen ever since. And Garrett Whitlock did the same, being selected from the Yankees to the Boston Red Sox. He's been, oscillating between their rotation and bullpen ever since, but a career 3.5 ERA is pretty darn good, especially pitching in Fenway. Also in 2020, the Orioles selected Tyler Wells from the Minnesota Twins. He was one of their best pitchers this year. He's one of the best pitchers on the team that won the most games in the American League. And finally, one of the stars of the show last year was Ryan Noda, selected from the Dodgers by the Oakland Athletics, and it turns out he's a great Oakland Athletics Moneyball type player, 364 on base percentage, 121 OPS plus, in what was essentially a full season of work as their everyday first baseman. So now it's time for, drumroll please, the Bailey Big Board. These are 20 Rule 5 draft eligible guys for this year that I think are interesting. Will all of them be drafted? No. Will the majority of them be drafted? Maybe not, honestly, but these are 20 guys that I think are interesting one way or another. If I were running a big league ball club, I would at least take a look at them. And the most interesting guy, just from a name brand value perspective, is Asa Lacy, because Asa Lacy was the 4th overall pick of the 2020 MLB draft, and he is Rule 5 draft eligible. The Kansas City Royals have not added him to their 40-man roster. Now, you can imagine why. Things have not gone well for Asa Lacy since he turned pro. He did not pitch at all in 2023. In 2022, he had an ERA over 10. So things have not gone well. There have been injuries. But if you look back at his college career, look at the numbers he was putting up with Texas A&M. With Texas A&M, he had an ERA of 2, and he struck out 224 batters in 152 innings in the SEC, which is, the toughest amateur league you can play in, basically. I think, do I think he'll be picked? I actually don't think so, because it's been such a disaster so far, but you can see a team talking themselves into it, right? So maybe, but yeah, that's Asa Lacy. Things have not gone well for him since he was selected 4th overall, and I'm sure some team will at least consider picking him because of the draft pedigree. This is actually the highest drafted player who has been left unprotected in the Rule 5 draft since 2016. So it's not very often you see a player with this draft pedigree available in the Rule 5 draft. Even though Lacy is definitely the headline name, I think the Royals have another guy who is actually probably more Rule 5 draftable than Lacy is, and that's Devin Mann. So Devin Mann, you can see here from his Baseball Reference photo, originally a Dodger. In fact, he was traded at the trade deadline from the Dodgers to the Royals in the deal that sent Ryan Yarbrough from the Royals to the Dodgers. And what happened here is Devin Mann was tearing it up for the Dodgers AAA affiliate. He had an OPS of 943, and then he proceeded to not tear it up for the Royals AAA affiliate. And I think that's why they have left him unprotected. Even though they did indeed trade for him not that long ago, they said, hey, this guy wasn't really any good for us. Maybe the Dodgers got one over on us. So he's unprotected. I think there's a good to decent chance he is selected, because not only does he have some still overall good hitting stats from AAA, this past year, he still had an OPS nearly 900, even if you combine the good games with the Dodgers and the bad games with the Royals. He has some defensive versatility. He's played some first base, some second base, some third base. It's just kind of all around the infield, and that's going to give him a leg up over some of the next guys we're going to look at who are strictly sort of, first basemen. Like Blaine Crim of the Texas Rangers, drafted by them in the 19th round of the 2019 draft. Blaine Crim this year with AAA Round Rock, 22 home runs, an OPS of nearly 900. And I will point out, in the PCL especially, the league-wide offensive environment is pretty high. So like a 900 OPS there, it's good, but the league-wide OPS there is over 800, for example. But yeah, 22 home runs still. Really nice ratios in terms of the strikeouts and walks, and that's what sort of allowed him to hit for average 290. This could be just a good, well-rounded hitter to add to your team. As far as whether I think he'll be picked or not, I think I'm going to give him like kind of 50-50. He's actually not my pick for the player in this mold. My pick for the player in this mold is Troy Johnston of the Miami Marlins. I was a little surprised when they didn't protect him. He is a lefty, so that's different from Crim, but he's also a guy who's probably going to play primarily first base for you, maybe some outfield, and basically, he's here to hit. And boy, last year, he definitely hit between AA and AAA, so this is all in the upper levels of the minors. He had 26 home runs. He also stole 24 bases with some efficiency. This is a great slash line right here, 307 average, 399 on base, 549 slug, 948 OPS. I don't know, it feels like the Marlins could have maybe used a bat like this, but he is unprotected, and he is my pick to be sort of the next Ryan Noda. Like, this is going to be the guy who I think a team picks, and he sort of plug him into the lineup every day. I think he's got a real shot to be that, and I think it is likely that he will be selected in the Rule 5 draft because of that. Anthony Prato of the Minnesota Twins. This is a guy whose name I have not seen bubble up much. I've read some other Rule 5 draft preview coverage from the likes of Baseball America and MLB Pipeline. This guy's name didn't really come up, but I found him when I was searching through some of the AAA leaderboards, and it's because he just had a really weird year in the Minnesota Twins system, because in AA, he stunk. He stunk in AA, and then they promoted him to AAA, and he was like, oh, never mind, I'm awesome. I'm awesome in AAA. I'm going to have an OPS of nearly 1,000 in AAA, and I think teams don't necessarily know what to make of that, but, he raked in AAA over, a 300 plate appearance sample size, and I think he does have some defensive versatility to offer you. He could play second base, he could play third base, maybe even in the outfield a little bit. So Anthony Prato of the Minnesota Twins, I think he's one to keep an eye on, and he's a little bit under the radar right now. I would say he's probably, 25%, 30% to get picked in this draft, but I would definitely consider him just based on what he did in AAA. Shay Whitcomb, this guy is getting some love. He's only just turned 25. He was a 5th-round draft pick for the Astros in 2020, and he hit 35 home runs this year playing primarily shortstop, and that's pretty much how I would sell it to you. 35 home runs, he's a shortstop with power. Why wouldn't you want that on your team? Well, the overall plate skills aren't that great. Like, he struck out a lot. He struck out 178 times in 589 plate appearances. Like, think of what that strikeout rate, in the upper levels of the minors might translate to in the big leagues. Maybe not that great, but he did also steal 20 bases. He will definitely be considered. Will he be picked? I don't know. I give him 50-50. I really don't know. It's really tough to ascertain that, but he's definitely on the radar for some of these teams. Kameron Misner, here's a guy I like a lot, even though he also has those big strikeout problems. First of all, he's a former first-round pick, so he does have that draft pedigree, although I don't really know if that means anything, 4 or 5 years after the fact. But he is just an excellent athlete. He's stolen 90 bases, hit 51 home runs in his minor league career, 370 on base percentage. So even if he strikes out a lot, he also walks a lot. And I've just always kind of been in on him as a prospect. I've always felt like he has really good potential. And he hasn't broken through to the big leagues yet. In AAA with the Rays last year, he was in AAA all year with the Rays last year. 2020 season, you might look and say, oh, he only hit 226. He struck out 186 times, but he also walked 91 times. So an 821 OPS for him on the season. I would definitely consider him. I don't know if he is going to be heavily considered by teams around the league necessarily, so I don't love his chances of being Rule 5 drafted. There are definitely guys, like Troy Johnston or Devin Mann, who are more likely to be picked than him. But, depending on how many players are selected, I think teams would definitely, enjoy having someone like him on their team. He's 6'4", 218 pounds, so he's big, he's fast, he's athletic. I don't know. I'd want him on my team. Jimmy Herron, an outfielder for the Colorado Rockies. This guy is definitely a foolish Bailey favorite, meaning he's not getting a lot of love. I've searched through MLB Pipeline, I searched through Baseball America, I searched through Twitter, and just not really any buzz for Jimmy Herron in this Rule 5 draft coming up. He is an outfielder in the Rockies system. The thing that I think you would get with Jimmy Herron is you would get some speed, some base stealing ability, because he just stole 33 bases to only 5 caught stealing at the AAA level, and in general hit pretty well at the AAA level. I mean, I know this is nearly a 900 OPS, but you got to consider it's PCL, it's Albuquerque, so the league-wide offensive environment is high there. Also hit 19 home runs, but I think if you're looking for speed on the base paths and some defensive versatility in the outfield, and you're trying to add that to your major league roster, this is a guy definitely worth looking at. I know he's 27, but he was a third rounder in the 2018 draft out of Duke, and he just had a pretty good season in AAA, and maybe he can steal some bases for you. If that's what you need on the bench, that's what you could maybe get with Jimmy Herron. Now, the guy who's actually getting hyped for the defense in the outfield and the speed on the base paths is DaShawn Keirsey. I think DaShawn Keirsey is more likely to be selected in the draft than Jimmy Herron, just based on some of the coverage I'm seeing. DaShawn Keirsey, he stole 39 bases last year after stealing 42 the previous year, so maybe a better track record of base stealing overall. Also had an OPS of 821 combined between AA and AAA within the Minnesota Twins system, 15 home runs to add on to that. So he's a guy I think has a good chance to be selected. I would say, 60%, 70%, just because, teams need defense in the outfield. Teams need a good fourth outfielder. Teams need a good pinch runner that can steal them a base late in the games. This could be that guy. Shane Sasaki, this is a really interesting one. So he was drafted in the 3rd round out of high school, 2019 MLB draft by the Tampa Bay Rays, so he is now eligible. He was drafted, age 18 or younger out of high school. It's been 5 seasons since then. And, because of 2020, for example, his progression through the minors has been slow. And so in 2023 last year, he only played 64 games. He was playing at the high A level, so he has not made it to the upper levels of the minors yet. But he played really well. This is a great slash line at that level of the minors, and team might take a chance on him. Akil Baddoo, who was selected out of the Rule 5 draft a few years ago, had a good rookie season after he hadn't played above high A. So there is recent precedent for this, but Shane Sasaki is someone who I think will be looked at. I'm not sure if I would pick him, just because I think I would struggle to pick anyone who hadn't at least played in the upper level minors a little bit. But just based on what I'm hearing, some of the coverage from other sources, he will be considered for sure by some of these teams in the Rule 5 draft. Nasim Nuñez, I think this could be the most fun pick in the entire draft. I don't know if he'll be picked, but it would be a fun pick if someone went for it. Former 2nd rounder. You can see he actually played in the Futures game in the Marlins system this year, so that's kind of funny. Futures game, but sorry, bud, you're unprotected for the Rule 5 draft. The thing about Nasim Nuñez is he's not a big league hitter. He's not ready to hit at the big league level at all. You can see his stats from AA. They're not very good, apart from the fact that, he can draw a walk. But he's not a good hitter. But what you would get with Nasim Nuñez is really, really good glove up the middle, shortstop and second baseman. So if you just need that utility infielder, that great defense, maybe even, maybe it's future Gold Glove defense for all I know. But that's what you would get with Nasim Nuñez. You would not get a big league quality hitter, at least not right away. But, just the glove alone could be tempting. Freddy Zamora of the Brewers. This is actually a guy I would prefer to Nasim Nuñez, just because I think he can hit a little bit. 2nd rounder in the 2020 draft, also a shortstop and second baseman, so hopefully giving you that good defense up the middle. 2022 with the Biloxi Shuckers, by the way, no less, had a bad year, only played 24 games, got hurt, and in those 24 games he played one good. 2023, a little bit of a comeback. This isn't an incredible slash line, but AA, hard level to hit at. Southern League, hard to hit at this year. Their strikeouts were way up this year, and he did not strike out all that much, which is impressive overall. Stole 17 bases as well. I've been following his career with interest since back in 2021. 2021, he had a good season in the minors, and I was like, oh, Freddy Zamora, he's one to keep an eye on. He's now Rule 5 draft eligible a couple years later, and I don't know if he'll be picked. I would put his chances at, probably below 20% even. I don't think he's on everybody's radar necessarily, but I would definitely consider him. I think highly of him as a prospect relative to the industry. Pablo Aliendo, the young Venezuelan catcher, really young, by the way, only 22 years old. This is maybe the youngest Rule 5 draft eligible player we'll talk about in this entire video. Catcher in the Chicago Cubs system. I talked about him already on this channel on my Statline Scouting series after he had a really hot start to the season in AA with the Cubs. He cooled off after that and overall put together a still, very respectable slash line for a catcher, but not anything that's going to make you go, whoa, 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 awooga, wow, 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 wow. Sorry about that. But Pablo Aliendo, actually, journalism alert, by the way, person giving me the credentials, journalism alert, actually reached out to a Cubs employee, asked him, hey, do you think this guy's going to get Rule 5 drafted from y'all or not? And he said, probably around 25% chance. And I said, I think that's spot on. I would give it about a 25% chance. Anonymous Cubs employee, not named. Journalism alert. Credential next year, journalism alert, reaching out to team sources. But anyways, 16 home runs, 91 games, can play respectable catcher defense, hopefully. I think what's going against him getting Rule 5 drafted, even though he would be definitely the catcher I would pick, is that teams don't often use the Rule 5 draft to address their backup catcher. It's usually more like a third catcher, like emergency catcher, like bench bat type, and I don't think he's that. I think if a team drafted him, it would be just as their straight-up backup catcher, and you actually don't see teams use the Rule 5 draft for that all that much. Coleman Crow, this is a really unique situation. So first of all, I statline scouted this guy last year in 2022. Even though his ERA was nearly 5, I said, these are really good ratios in strikeouts and walks and a really good ground ball rate given his age and the level he's playing at. And that turned out to be kind of right because next year in 4 starts, he was absolutely killing it. Again, facing competition that on average was a couple years older than him. And then he got hurt, so he only made 4 starts. And he was traded to the Mets, and the Mets knew he was hurt. He underwent Tommy John surgery in August of this year, so he's probably not going to pitch at all in 2024. And the Mets have left him unprotected on their 40-man roster. And so what makes this a really unique situation is if you draft Coleman Crow in the Rule 5 draft, let's presume he doesn't pitch at all in 2024, you have to keep him on your 2025 active 26-man roster for 90 days, so for half the season, or else he will be returned. So that's a unique situation. If you draft Coleman Crow now, you can at least have him under your team's guidance as far as his the rest of his Tommy John rehab and recovery goes, and then you can see what he's got in 2025 and whether or not you want to offer up a roster spot to him or not. I would highly consider doing it no matter what, because you don't know what your team's going to be like in 2025. You don't know what the needs are going to be, but you can at least have this guy under your guidance. You can at least keep an eye on him as he rehabs and recovers. And I really do think he is a talented pitcher. And if he can get back to the level he was pitching at early on in 2023, it's going to be a steal. So I would absolutely draft Coleman Crow, and I bet someone goes for it. I bet someone does. I'm decently confident someone would at least take a look at him and see how he's doing on his road to recovery. Tanner Burns. It's really hard to predict the Rule 5 draft. It's really hard to keep track of the so many eligible players, which ones are for real and which ones are not. This is the one time I'm going to give you the Bailey guarantee. This man, Tanner Burns, will be selected in the Rule 5 draft this year, probably relatively early, let's say first 5 picks or so. Tanner Burns, a pitcher in the Cleveland Guardians system. And this is just the Cleveland Guardians almost flexing on us, saying, hey, we have so much pitching in our minor league system. We can leave this guy, a former first rounder, no less, unprotected. And he's been, putting up solid numbers every year, always with that ERA in the 3s. Last year, an ERA of 3.01 at the AA level. They actually converted him to a reliever halfway through the year. So he started 14 games, but pitched in 29 total. And I think whatever team drafts him would probably use him out of the bullpen. That would be my guess, just because you can use him in sort of like low leverage bullpenny spots. But yeah, he's a guy. He's a former first round pick. He's literally never been bad in his entire professional and college career in Auburn. And he's definitely going to be selected. And it's just the Guardians flexing on us, saying, hey, we have so much pitching, we can leave this guy unprotected. Chih-Jung Liu, a Taiwanese pitcher in the Boston Red Sox system. Here's my thing with the Rule 5 draft. Give me the starting pitcher. Give me the starting pitcher and let me convert them to the bullpen. I don't necessarily want to draft the guy who's already been a reliever. Give me the starting pitcher. Let me convert him to the bullpen in the hope that the stuff ticks up. And he's got the stuff. His ERA last year in AA with Portland, over 5. So it's, a lot of walks, but 145 strikeouts and 114 innings. Let me take that starting pitcher. Let me convert him to the bullpen, and let's just see what he's got. So I would highly consider drafting him. Will he be selected? I'm gonna give it let's give it like 60%. I'm going to give it over 50%. Let's give it 60%. But I like him. I would definitely pick him. And he's not on like some of the radars. Like, again, I've read some Rule 5 draft coverage. He's not mentioned a ton, but I see 145 strikeouts at AA, and I say, let me just put this guy in the bullpen and see what's going on. Austin Pope of the Arizona Diamondbacks, 25 years old. This is the reliever I would go for. If I just had to go for someone who had been a reliever in the minors this past season, it would probably be him. Really nice ratios here. 84 strikeouts, 23 walks, 6 home runs, and 66 innings pitched last year between, AA and AAA. Actually, better ERA in AAA than AA. So that's just, that's who I'd go for. He pitched in Fall League this year. Wasn't that great. But yeah, a lot of times relievers are selected in the Rule 5 draft because you can kind of hide them on your roster. You don't always have to pitch them in the high leverage situations. You can pitch them in the low leverage situations at first, see what you got, and then potentially, move them into those higher leverage situations if they're, major league ready. But yeah, so relievers commonly picked in Rule 5 draft. Austin Pope, I think, one of the more likely of that group to be selected. Justin Slaten of the Texas Rangers. This guy's definitely getting some Rule 5 draft hype, at least in the public sphere. You never know entirely what the teams are thinking behind closed doors, but at least in the public sphere, he's definitely known as a legit prospect for this draft. Drafted by the Texas Rangers in the 3rd round of the 2019 June amateur draft. This year, here's what you gotta know. 59 innings pitched, 86 strikeouts, ERA below 3. He will be drafted as a reliever. He's supposedly got some pretty good stuff. I imagine with those strikeouts numbers he does. But yeah, Justin Slaten of the Texas Rangers will be considered for the Rule 5 draft to be held on Wednesday. Juan Sanchez of the San Francisco Giants, pretty undersized for a pitcher, 5'9", 165. But here's what you got to know about him. Beyond, pretty solid performance between AA and AAA last year in the Giants system, ERA of 3, 80 strikeouts and 74 innings. The main appeal here is he's young. He just turned 23, so he's young compared to a lot of the other guys in this Rule 5 draft, especially guys who are, American-born players drafted out of college. He's young and he throws lefty, so he's the main lefty reliever we're looking at for this upcoming Rule 5 draft, and I think that those things work in his favor, even if, the numbers and the stuff aren't as impressive as someone like Justin Slaten. He's younger and he's a lefty, and I think teams will value that. And the 20th player on Bailey's big board, or the Big Bailey board, or whatever I just called it, is Nelson Alvarez. He's definitely a foolish Bailey pick. I have not seen any hype for this guy at all. And, to some extent I can understand he has not pitched in AAA, for example, but he's in the Rays organization, and his ratios in strikeouts and walks were quite impressive last year, and not pictured here, although you can see it on Fangraphs if you're curious. He had a really good ground ball rate. It was well north of 50%, and I like a ground ball guy overall. In the Southern League, and I think I pointed this out once already, the Southern League, the strikeouts were already really high, so yes, he had 57 and 37 innings, but, the ball was spinning a lot. It was pre-tacked, so there were just a lot of strikeouts in that league in general. But yeah, he's not likely to be selected at all based on what I'm seeing in the public sphere, but I don't know, I'd take a look at him. Why not? Nelson Alvarez. Before the draft on Wednesday, I would highly recommend checking out Fangraphs roster resource. They'll tell you how many players each team has on their 40-man, so you can see, the Royals are full, the Rockies are full. So if things still stand that way, then they're not going to make any selection in this draft. They're not going to have room to add such a player. Dodgers are at 41. That's because yesterday they signed Joe Kelly. I'm recording this on Sunday, full transparency. Yesterday they signed Joe Kelly, and they haven't figured out who they're going to get rid of off the 40-man. In the corresponding move, but they will get down to 40 before the draft. You have to. And then, the rest of these teams, they do have 40-man roster spots available, but keep in mind, the winter meetings are just starting as of recording this, and so this will be updated. Teams will sign major leaguers. They'll be added to the 40-man, and so you may get to the draft, and, not every team has a spot available to even add a Rule 5 draft pick. That's okay, but at least we should keep an eye on that going into the draft. I'll definitely be checking on this before the draft on Wednesday. There's also a minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft. It's usually not that consequential, besides every now and then saying like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. But every now and then, yes, a player of consequence will be selected. Ryan Thompson was selected in the minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft by the Tampa Bay Rays. He became a good reliever for them, and then he was on the Diamondbacks this year, pitching for them in the World Series. Alan Winans was selected from the Mets in the minor league portion a few years ago by the Braves, and this year he made his major league debut, started 6 games for them. That was something, at least. And hey, maybe a little steal alert, last year in the minor league portion, the Marlins snatched Dane Myers from the Detroit Tigers. He had a really nice year between AA and AAA in the Marlins organization, actually made his big league debut as well. He could be one to keep an eye on. But generally, the minor league portion, it's going to be a bunch of guys who I've never even heard of and you've never even heard of. But every now and then you'll be like, oh yeah, I know that guy's name. That's basically what it is. And then maybe 3 years later, you're like, yeah, didn't that guy get selected in the minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft? But yeah, I'm focused on the major league portion. I would also recommend some other outlets for Rule 5 draft coverage. Baseball America is the best. It is paywalled, so I'm not going to show you too much of what they've got going on, but it'll be updated, daily, probably multiple times per day leading up to the draft as, new candidates emerge and then some are removed from the list. Right now, they've got a list of about 37 guys you can look at. But yeah, that's Baseball America. That's my personal favorite go-to. If you're looking for something that's not behind a paywall, MLB Pipeline has you covered as well. They just published 30 intriguing Rule 5 draft options, one for each team, so one from each organization that could be under threat of being Rule 5 drafted, snatched away, stolen from you for absolutely nothing just because you wouldn't add them to the 40-man roster. And don't worry, guys. All of these fine gentlemen are credentialed. So if you can't stomach the idea of getting your baseball talk, your Rule 5 draft talk from someone who is, gasp, uncredentialed, don't worry, just check these out, exit out of this video. I'm sorry, I'm uncredentialed this year. That is it for my Rule 5 draft preview, but please come back. Tune in on Wednesday. I will do a live stream on this channel of the Rule 5 draft in my bid to get a credential for the future. I will have Bailey's big board up. I will hope that maybe, 6 of the guys on the big board or 8 of the guys on the big board maybe get picked. It's really hard to predict. There's hundreds of eligible players, so it's really hard to predict what teams will value what. But yeah, we'll have a lot of fun with it. Rule 5 draft live stream during the draft Wednesday afternoon. Please come by. Stay tuned. Also use code FOOLISH for SeatGeek and Foolish20 for StatHead. You probably know what those do already by now if you're watching this channel.